Welcome back to Plain Talk on CIOE 97.5 FM. Jeremy Aikman with Michelle Raymond and our special guest Diane Weber-Bederman. Just before the break, I was talking about some fake news about President Trump. Before I get your reaction, there are two other things that I noticed this week. There was the CPAC convention that President Trump attended and gave a speech, and there were two things that came out of that.
Sorry, you better clarify what CPAC is in the United States.
Oh, it's what's it called? The Conservative something.
Progressive Action Committee.
Action Committee.
Yeah. Political Action Committee.
Yeah, that's
it's not political television like it is here in Canada.
Thank you for that clarification,
Okay.
Michelle.
Sorry.
Okay, the first one came from my friend Kathy Barnett was there, and she witnessed a reporter from the Turner Broadcasting System asking a delegate if he would take the iPad and play solitaire on it so he could have his photographer take a picture of him and then run a story about how boring President Trump's speech was. And it was only because the guy objected quite strenuously that it came to Kathy's attention. She turned around and she saw what was going on. The other one, and I've seen the footage of this myself, is that the reporter Ryan Clayton from Huffington Post went around the delegates handing them a rolled up piece of cloth. And his cameraman was walking several yards behind him, and they were Russian flags. And the idea was that he would take pictures of the delegates holding these Russian flags so they could run a story, Trump supporters share his Russian connections or whatever. How does this strike you, Diane?
I don't trust the media anymore at all. And I think that's frightening because in a democracy, if you do not have a media that holds institutions to account, you will lose your democracy. And we now have a media that is so firmly entrenched and in bed with people on the left, not the far left, just on the left, that when you see anything, when you start having to question everything you see, and you cannot trust your media, then you can be taken over by by the media. And then you get greater divisiveness because you don't see the other side of the story. I think this is, they call Trump a fascist, but it's the media that is behaving that way.
Michelle, what do you think about those two examples that I've given you, plus the lie that the CBC is telling almost every day of the week?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm ready to agree that it's a lie on the part of the CBC because, as you and I both know, there are a whole wide range of polls, and we may not all be looking at the same polls. So I'm not willing to say it's a lie. But I do think the staging of news is...
You're calling me a liar.
No, I'm not. I'm saying you may be misguided, simply misguided.
Well, I mean,
But no, I mean, there's always...
There has been no...
There's always a wide band of polls.
There has been no poll of any kind that has shown Trump as low as 28%, which is where Nixon was. Anyway, we're on another topic.
All right, but the staging of news, obviously, is never acceptable. It's interesting that, in fact, in both of those cases, they were trying to create news about media rather than news about what the media were observing. They're saying, here are the media carrying Russian flags, here are the media being bored. Is that what I understand?
No, the media were trying to create their own story.
They were handing them to delegates. I'm sorry.
Huffington Post guy was handing these to people
delegates themselves.
So that when they opened them, he could take a picture of them.
Well, staging is never acceptable. We have this dialogue began, probably 15 or 20 years ago that, there is a left media and there is a right media and so on. And once that became the discussion, I think we began a really very divisive.
Now, very surprisingly, on Friday, CBS host John Dickerson, who's the political director of the Columbia Broadcasting System, and who's the anchor of Face the Nation, was speaking on a program, and he said that the media is responsible for ruining its own reputation, not the president. Would you agree with that?
Well, to the degree that, as I say, 15 to 20 years ago, there began to be questions as to credibility of media. I also think that one of the difficulties that we have in the political world, and has been for quite some time, is that people are, that the media have accepted, and not necessarily, that they have accepted and played to, what do you want to call them? I don't call them baser instincts, but, whatever is the quickest and easiest thing to understand, not necessarily the most thoughtful thing.
Well,
and it has lowered the tone of political debate,
now,
too.
I have so many fake news
All right.
stories about the president,
Okay.
it's not even funny. But
Yeah.
to move away from the media for a while, there's a rink at a private school in New York, I think it's called the Dalton School, which the president helped to fund when he was in private life. And the parents objected, and so they cancelled the skating party for the children. And at another private school in New York, the parents are protesting because they don't want their children to go to the same school as Barron Trump, his 10-year-old son.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? I mean, that's got to be...
That's sick. That's propaganda taken to such an extreme. It's left-wing ideology taken to such an extreme that it comes and eats itself, because these are people who talk about being inclusive and accommodating and welcoming, and this is what you stand for, and then you take it out on a 10-year-old?
Yeah, I don't have any children. As you know, my son died, but if he, I wouldn't have minded if he'd gone to school with Mao Zedong's child, so long as he didn't spend any time with Mao.
Yeah.
Michelle, what's your reaction to
How can
this?
you speak to being inclusive and tolerant and open and loving to immigrants and refugees, but not to the child of the President of the United States? That's hate. That is such deeply embedded hate that they've been blinded by it.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I must confess. Some other curious things that have happened this week is that the appeal court, the panel, the three-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Appeal Court, which upheld the original ruling by the Seattle judge against President Trump's temporary ban, has in effect appealed its own decision. It has taken its decision to the entire court, which I think comprises 13 judges, and has asked them to rule whether or not their decision was the correct one. That strikes me as very odd, doesn't it, you, Michelle?
No, I can understand that, because that was almost an interim thing. I don't believe that panel were all even sitting together in the same time and place. As you recall, it was done within about 36 hours. I think it was done over telephone or email or something. It was put together really on an almost emergency interim basis. So without having seen the actual article, I can understand that they may have gone to the full court, because obviously this is not the kind of thing that usually comes to circuit courts. They may have gone to the full court for confirmation.
Is that the same that when there were the three judges and the president's lawyer spoke? Because there was the three panel,
This was in San Francisco.
Yeah.
That was in San Francisco, okay.
There was the original judge in Seattle who struck down the president's executive order was unconstitutional, and that was then appealed to the Ninth Circuit Appeal Court in California, and a three-person panel of that appeals court heard that and then upheld the original judge's decision.
Yeah, and now it's going to a 13 panel?
So they say,
to the full
yes.
court, yeah.
Mm.
I don't know what the procedural rules are, but I can kind of understand that they would be doing that. Yes, it was an injunctional.
Well, it struck me.
I think it's fascinating. It sounds like there's been pushback, and the court is beginning to question itself.
Well, I don't know. I've never been able to understand judges, and I probably never will. Anyway, moving on to more, I was going to say more pleasant news, but actually it's unpleasant news. It is that the federal government ran a budgetary shortfall of $14 billion over the first 9 months of last year, compared with the $3.2 billion surplus over the same period the previous year. And the projection now is that at the end of fiscal year 2016-2017, which ends on March 31st, the federal deficit on the operating account will be $25.1 billion. Michelle, how does that grab you?
Well, all I can say is that in October, they were, as you know, the initial pledge was that there'd be a $10 billion cap on the deficit, on the annual deficit, and that had blown by back in February. But in October, they were projecting a $29.4 billion deficit, so I suppose $25 billion is, moving in the right direction?
Well,
I don't know.
If it's 2.5 times
down.
what they
I
originally
know,
said.
absolutely.
Diane, are you...
Not getting as fast as it could.
The only thing you can do is laugh, otherwise you cry. I mean, what are you going to do? This is a man this is a prime minister, I don't think he's ever in Ottawa. Every time I open the newspaper, he's somewhere else taking selfies, and he's spending a lot of money, but I don't know where he's improved anyone's life. So this is what he was elected for. Goodies. And he's coming through with the goodies.
Well,
and that's a Liberal government for you.
We're going we're going to have to wrap it up, but let me just note before we do the pleasantries that at the present time, Canadians, and that's all of you who are listening, we are paying $831 every second in interest. On our debt. Now, that's it. Before I say goodbye, I have to thank you, Diane, for being our guest. Michelle,
thank you very much.
I have to thank you for being a wonderful partner and co-host on this show for well over a year now. This is your last show. You're leaving us. It's a sad day for me. You've been wonderful to work with you.
It's been wonderful fun.
Hope you'll come back and visit us once in a while.
I certainly will.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right.
Thank you all for listening to Plain Talk on CIOE 97.5 FM.